Hello and welcome to the EcoCast. Today's topic, supercharging education, government IT, and cloud environments. This event is brought to you in partnership with Duo and Rubrik. Thank you so much for joining us on the EcoCast. We've got a great event lined up for you. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as your moderator. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, just a few things that you should know about the event. We at Actual Tech Media created the MegaCast and EcoCast event series to help educate IT professionals such as yourselves about the latest and greatest in enterprise technology to help you do it from the comfort of your office or home office, whatever it might be these days, to help you learn as much as possible, get all your questions answered, and hopefully have a good time too, have some fun. We've got some great prizes lined up for the event, and we're here to help you get all your questions answered. At Actual Tech Media, we're all former IT professionals ourselves, so we know how tough it can be in the IT organization to solve your challenges that just seem to be never ending. So with that, just a few things about the event. You should know the questions box, it's there on the left-hand side of your audience console. I can call your attention to it this way. I encourage you to check that out. Of course, we welcome all the hello and welcome messages from across the United States and around the world, but we also want your technical questions. I'll be doing Q&A sessions with each of today's expert presenters, and I'll be queuing up the best questions for that. We also have a new Best Question prize, which I'll be talking about in just a moment. We also want this to be a social event. You can tweet directly from your console using the Twitter icon on the bottom of the screen, and the hashtag for today, ATM EcoCast, will be automatically appended. There's also a number of resources there in the Handouts tab. You'll find 2 PDF assets, one from Duo and one from Rubrik. I encourage you to download those now because they won't be as easily accessible after the event today. And then I mentioned prizes. We do have 3 Amazon $500 gift cards. I'll be announcing those after each presentation on the event today, so make sure that you stay tuned. The primary requirement for the drawings is that you must be live in attendance. There are a number of other legalese prize terms and conditions that you should be aware of. You can find those there in the Handouts tab under ATM prize terms. All prize winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media. We'll reach out to prize winners via email after the event. And then I mentioned this is new for 2021. We're doing a Best Question prize. It's a $50 Amazon gift card for each session. So we've got 2 sessions on the event today. That's 2 more Amazon $50 gift cards that you'll be eligible for if you enter a question for the Q&A sessions. You can do that at any point during the presentation. You must also meet the Actual Tech Media prize policy as well. Now, thanks to generous attendees who have won prizes over the years, we have been able to donate thousands of dollars to charities like the ones you see here on the screen. We've done that, again, thanks to generous attendees and also thanks to the Gorilla Guide book series. I encourage you to check them out over at gorilla.guide. You can actually click on the screen there. You can go to the Handouts tab and click on the Gorilla Guide Book Club and download free educational IT books. Some of the best educational resources there in the enterprise tech industry today. Social media, again, the hashtag is ATM EcoCast over on Twitter. You can follow Actual Tech Media. You can follow me as well, David M. Davis. Always excited to chat about enterprise technology and the latest and greatest in tech like we do here on these events. You can subscribe to the Actual Tech Media channels, YouTube, Facebook, the 10 on Tech podcast, up in the top right-hand corner of your audience console, over on LinkedIn as well. And now before I introduce you to our first presenter, just a little bit of stage setting content here, a little bit of content to set the stage for what we're about to talk about on the event today when it comes to supercharging education and government IT organizations. I mean, when it comes to the public sector IT in 2021, 2020 was definitely a chaotic year for all of us, but especially in the education and government sectors, all across the public sector. And 2021 honestly seems to be like it may be not that different, really. The only difference is that we kind of know now what to expect. So maybe less chaos is a good way to put it. But like I said, it's been especially chaotic for state, local, and educational IT organizations dealing with the effects of the pandemic, and 100% of the workforce or students or whatever it might be, all working from home. And the challenges on the list, I'm sure you're aware of these, but just to kind of highlight some of them, of course, 100% work from home, study from home, and also we've seen with the pandemic a much greater increase in the number of malicious attacks, ransomware attacks, hacking events, and unfortunately, the public sector institutions are really a prime target for this. We've also had a rapid change in priorities and budgets, and I'm going to be asking you a poll question here about this in just a moment. So, of course, we always appreciate your participation in the polls. And I know a number of organizations that I've read about or heard about have done sudden cloud migrations. Have kind of made snap judgments and decided to, not that it's a bad thing, but suddenly changed their plans, and maybe they were planning to move to the cloud in the next year or two, but they said, well, with the changes here in priorities, we're going to do it right now. And a lot of that has been driven by remote work demands, desktop as a service, the need to bring up all employees with a remote desktop immediately and quickly, and the cloud has been an easy way to do that. And so, in order to supercharge your IT organization, in my opinion, one of the things you need is really innovative data protection and disaster recovery. If you were to be hit with a ransomware, some sort of malicious attack, you're going to need to be able to restore your data, restore it quickly, easily, and do a mass data restore. And that may not be something that a lot of IT organizations have tested or have planned for in some time. And so innovative data protection and disaster recovery, and also state-of-the-art security to prevent these types of attacks before they happen. And you'll be learning about innovative DR and data protection today from Rubrik, as well as state-of-the-art security solutions from Duo. We have some great presentations lined up from both of those experts. And then finally, just efficiency and scalability and greater agility, just all around the IT organization. To me, there's just so much overwhelming complexity in IT organizations today, and we need smarter software solutions, cloud-based solutions to help eliminate that complexity and give us efficiency, try to make us in IT into sort of the superheroes, if you will, of the company. That's what I like to think of IT professionals as, the superheroes of the company. But we need, just like Batman, we need some great tools on our tool belt to be able to make us the superheroes that we are. So with that, I'm really excited about today's EcoCast. You'll hear from experts at Duo and Rubrik on how their solutions can help you to supercharge your IT organization. And before I introduce you to our first presenter, just a couple of quick poll questions for you. The first one is, with the impact of COVID, how has your IT budget changed for 2021? And the answers here are, the budget's increased, or it stayed the same, or maybe it stayed the same, but the priorities, you've done some reshuffling of your budget, or maybe it's decreased. So I'll let everyone answer that question. You do this just right there in the slides window, and then I'll share the results of this poll with you, and you can kind of see how you stack up with your peers on the event today. All right, a lot of good votes coming in. Thank you for those. Let me go ahead now and share the results of this poll with you. And it looks like 20% said they had a budget increase, 13% said budgets stayed the same, 32% said the budget stayed the same, but the priorities were changed or reshuffled, and 32% said that their budget decreased. So, I mean, the good news I see here in these results are, if you add up the 20 plus the 13 plus the 32, don't make me do math, that's 52, 62, 65% said that either their budget increased or stayed the same. So that's a great number to see that, at least IT budgets kind of across the board, there hasn't been a major impact in those. So good news. Thank you for sharing that with us. One more poll question before I introduce you to our first presenter, and that is simply, what's your time frame? If you're looking to add new or update existing IT solutions at your company, I know this is something that's really ongoing. I mean, you never stop updating your IT hardware and software and solutions of some kind. It's just always in the plans. But, some plans are longer than others, longer time frame than others. So the question here is kind of, what's your overall time frame for adding new solutions or updating existing solutions? And while you answer that, I'll respond to some of these good morning and hello messages. Thank you to everyone out there. I see Scott, Emmanuel, John, Sandy, Ben Santa, Bill, Deo, Nivesh, Roger, Alex, Marty, Philip, Scott, Andrew. So thank you, everyone. Daniel, we, of course, appreciate all your hello and welcome messages. So great to see those. All right. Thank you, everyone who responded to that poll. We do appreciate it. Now it is time to kick off today's EcoCast. I'm excited to introduce you to Mr. Ted Keatsman, Product Marketing Manager at Duo. Ted, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah. Thanks for being on, Ted. Take it away.
All right. Thank you so much. And I appreciate everyone joining up, and I'm really excited to be here and talk to you all today. As was mentioned, I'm Ted. I work at a company called Duo Security. It's pretty well known, but if you don't know who we are, I'll get into a little bit of that. But I want to focus on something in particular today, which is anomaly detection, in particular for access anomalies, and thinking about how they can help in your IT environment, especially in this sort of remote work space or just generally. It's a really interesting space. We've done a lot to create helpful anomaly detection at Duo, and I'm going to get into that today. But to take a step back and just go over, who Duo is, or what we are. I think we're most famous for providing multi-factor authentication, or being an authentication provider. And we are focused on providing zero trust for your workforce. And what does that mean? Zero trust is a term that gets thrown around quite a bit. From our perspective, it means making sure that users who are logging into your applications are who they say they are. So verifying that. Multi-factor authentication is a great way to do it, making sure that those credentials haven't been compromised. Making sure that they're accessing your applications from a trusted device, whether that device is managed or they're trying to log in from their grandmother's or aunt's or wife's computer. Making sure that we do some health checks on that device, make sure that the device's posture is what we want it to be before allowing applications. And then enabling anybody working in IT to get visibility and set policies based on those things. So this is the glue that holds everything together. Really being able to see, all right, I can see all of my users and where they're accessing from and what their credentials are doing. And I can set policy based on that. I can say I don't want to allow this, I don't want to allow that activity. I don't have any users outside of this location or headquarters, so I don't want to allow any access from outside of that. And so that's the central glue that holds together sort of making sure your users are trusted and making sure they're accessing from trusted devices. So that's 30,000-foot Duo, but what I want to focus on today is inside the visibility and policies portion, which I've just been talking about, getting that device visibility and looking at device status and posture, And even we actually have self-remediation tools to help users, hey, your iOS is out of date. Hey, your Windows operating system is out of date. You're going to have to update that before you get access. These are all things we do now. But I want to focus on something that's brand new and has been really, really accelerated and popular and being adopted very quickly, even though it just came out at the end of last year. And that is access analytics. So what do I mean by access analytics? It's our Duo Trust Monitor feature. We're monitoring the trust of access. So what does that mean is we're looking at all of the authentication and access data in your environment to create a normal baseline. Joe Smith logs in from his home office every day at 9 a.m. and goes to this application, and then this application or logs into an SSO, and we understand that pattern, and we create a baseline. And then somebody else, the pattern might be different. And then by creating visibility into how users typically access applications or what devices they typically do that from, we start highlighting anomalous access. Hey, Jay Smith's credentials tried to access from Europe. I mean, it's sort of a lockdown right now. Are we sure that those are his credentials? Hey, Jay Smith's credentials, he almost always logs in from a laptop we've issued him. We see his credentials logging in from a different endpoint. Is that something we believe is trustworthy? These types of questions are the ones that Trust Monitor is helping you answer, with the goal of helping you say, hey, we're not going to allow certain types of endpoints. We're not going to allow certain geolocations. Basically helping by showing you these anomalies. One, helping you remediate that individual situation, but also then setting hardened or better policy in the future. So how does this all work at Duo? Well, to illustrate it, I have a diagram here to give you a sense of how it worked before we implemented this sort of access analytics. Data is messy. Data is often unstructured. So without access analytics, this is what login data might look like. This could be one office. This could be 9 a.m. Everyone logs in. This could be wherever the clusters are. This is what the pattern. You can sort of create a pattern around it. But there's no label here. There's nothing highlighting anything unusual. What we heard time and time again is people would, we had customers sorting through our authentication logs or sorting through authentication logs generally, and then trying to create something in Excel, some model, or trying to figure out, what was anomalistic. So, we decided to start doing that for customers. And what that means is we would take the variables we have, and I want to be clear here, Duo is an authentication provider, and we're in the IAM space. So we're not going to look at some of the data that a more robust or a more holistic vendor might look at. So, we're not trying to replace a SIM or some of the larger, or take data from every last network data or every last source. We're taking our data, so the data that we see, which is things like the time of authentication, the device that authentication is happening from, what application they're hitting, what country they're doing that from. And then we have an in-house data science team, which I also like to tout. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people can say that, but data science is something that the terms are very buzzwordy, but people are almost always, buying third-party software or doing something like that just so they can say ML in their marketing language. We have an in-house team. They're based in Austin, Texas. It's a team of really smart data scientists that are working specifically on our data to make sure that they're building out algorithms that work the best for us. And so they look at all of the factors we get and create a risk score behind the scenes. And that lets them start to say, all right, these dots or these access points are pretty anomalistic. They're the outliers, to use that old Malcolm Gladwell term. So we have these are ones that don't fit the patterns that we've seen for these sets of credentials. And an outlier actually will always fall into three categories. And these are the three labeled on the screen here. Benign anomalies, this is just, what we have to remember is people act strangely. So there will be something that's benign. I logged in at midnight to get some work done. There's also suspicious behavior, which is things that we probably raise an eyebrow at. And then there are actual attacks. These are credentials that are in the wrong hands, doing something malicious with a purpose. So let's get a little more concrete here. Many tools on the market in doing access analytics or just anomaly detection in generally implement pretty easy rules. And I referenced our data science team already, but by easy rules, I mean, here's something that's relatively easy to implement, and you've probably seen this in your bank login or something like that. And it's a good first rule, but for IT, for folks in IT, it's kind of a pain, and that is novelty. If it's a new device, if it's a new location, throw up a flare, send off an alarm. That's still an anomaly, but it's something that's going to increase the number of benign anomalies you see. It's something that's going to increase the number of false positives. Just because people access from new devices, they access from new locations, that's not always an indicator of malicious activity. So at Duo, our team has been very thoughtful about how we want to decrease those benign anomalies and make it a huge part of our mission to only surface things that are relevant to you. And the way that we do that is, we came in, and our team came in with the premise, people do new or strange things that aren't malicious. And we can't surface those all the time. It just leads to a clogging up of everyone's workflow, a clogging up of everyone's day. I've got to check on all these things. So our feature is really trying to reduce the number of false positives that we're showing in these access anomalies. And we do that by using historical and correlative context. And I'd like to give an example here because I think those words are pretty buzzy too. So let's get concrete about a real example. Sorry about the formatting issue there, but at Duo, we were in the before times when travel was a little more common. We were issued a Chromebook when we would travel. And Trust Monitor is built in such a way that it understands if a Chromebook device is seen from not your typical IP address, that's probably okay, because historically it's seen the policy set, or it's seen via the data that if you're using a Chromebook while traveling, that is benign. But for many other tools on the market, this is a classic example of something you would always fire off an alarm for. You would say, hey, it's a Chromebook, or it's a new device. They usually use this Windows device from their home office or from the office, and they usually work at this IP. Both of these things together mean that we're going to shoot off a flare. It's a new device, new IP. But at Duo, we're trying to look at the context and say, hey, when somebody's using a Chromebook, it probably means that their IP is not the one that they typically use. So it's a little more nuanced in how we're thinking about anomaly detection. That being said, we're still gonna surface things. One is, is it expected for an engineer's or software engineer's credentials to access Salesforce, an app they almost never access, given it's the weekend? The answer here is definitely not. We don't expect that at all. If we switched out that word for, account executive or, regional sales manager or whatever, that would all make sense. But in this case, an engineer's credentials would never access Salesforce and never access it definitely never access it on the weekend. So that's a very suspicious login. So, I've sort of talked theoretically, but just to give you a concrete example of, what does an anomaly look like in Duo? Well, for Duo, we do we can highlight on authentication. This is what the log would look like. Many anomaly detection tools on the market will give a risk score and say, hey, this is risky. It's an 89 out of 100, or it's a 7 out of a 10. And you go, well, how risky is that? I've got an 86 out of 100 over here, and I've got, an 8 out of a 10 over here. Are all of these hair on fire? At Duo, we like to say, we're only going to surface something to you if we think it deserves to have your eyes on it. So there's not, we're not adding this mental load on you to say, all right, I have to sort all of these events by, a number and then deal with the top ones first. If we've highlighted it, we think it's worthy of you to see it. If we don't highlight something, it's not. So we're a little more binary that way. But we do give you more context than just a risk score. So these red boxes, they're a little small, but say new access device, new app, and unusual 2FA method. You can roll over those within the tool and see all the statistics that led us to highlight this, this authentication to you. In this case, this one has a new access device. This user almost always, and the username's tiny there, but it's mglazer, almost always uses a Windows device in all their past authentications. In this case, they used a Mac, which in and of itself maybe isn't that worrisome, but they are also attempting access to an application that they don't typically access. They haven't accessed GitLab or the code base in the past 180 days. And finally, they're also using an unusual 2FA method. So Duo provides 2FA. One of the classic ways that you can do that is from a mobile push on your phone. And in this case, they're using SMS passcode, which, as we all know, NIST is downgraded to not being as secure because of SIM swapping and other ways to spoof a phone number. So these things together all point to, hey, this is a new device, new application, and also they've downgraded or down-factored the method of MFA that they're using. This looks pretty risky. We should look into this authentication. We should look into the mglazer's credentials. Just to provide a little more color, we provide other types of anomalies too. So it's not all just unusual time. We can or unusual device. We can do things like unrealistic geovelocity. These credentials logged in from LA, and then they logged in from New York, or they logged in from Virginia, and then they logged in from London. And if they did that too quickly, we kind of know that those credentials couldn't possibly, the person couldn't have traveled that far. So it's they're being used maybe maliciously. So we can highlight that. We can do unusual 2FA IP, or where they're doing their access from. We can also do unusual times. So we can see these credentials almost always log in from during this time window. And if they don't do that, if they don't follow that pattern, we can highlight things like that to you as well. So we also understood that statistical risk is one factor that you can use in assessing risk or malicious activity, but we also wanted to start providing non-statistical risk or just risky actions that we can base on hard rules. This has become even more relevant based on some of the things we've learned about the larger breaches in the news, especially when it comes to administrators or help desk agents taking risky actions. So one of the things that we highlight now in Duo is when somebody has had their bypass status enabled on them. So if somebody is hacked into a system and they're now, they've stolen administrator credentials from Duo or something like that, and they enable bypass status on a different set of credentials, or they're, or maybe it's an administrator who's, taking some sort of malicious action. You can see that in Duo and say, hey, were these credentials meant to be set into bypass mode where they're no longer seeing two-factor authentication? It's just something that we'll now highlight to make sure that when people are not receiving that second factor of authentication. and you can address it as need be. It very well might be the case that those credentials, don't need, or it's a help desk situation. Somebody needs to get in for a second, and then you can re-put the second factor back on. But it's just something we want to highlight. And also, obviously, anytime somebody marks fraud on an authentication, we'll highlight that to you too. So what does it actually take to use? It's pretty straightforward. It's not something where you have to put agents on all sorts of stuff. If you're using Duo, it's a couple clicks and you can get this running in the background, and the analytics will start highlighting risky events or risky authentication to you within 24 hours. So it's something to think about. Our engine in the background will start ingesting your data and looking at all of those patterns that I mentioned, and say, is this risky? Is this something I want to highlight? And as I mentioned before too, your inbox will only be things that we deem worthy of your attention, worthy of your time. While we were developing this tool, we went through a lot of back and forth with all sorts of different customers and through our private preview. And we understood that, it might not be the best fit for everyone to log into Duo at all. For those of you with more mature security organizations, perhaps, the prospect of going over to Duo and logging in to review these events is a little ominous. It's not something you really want to do. So we built out tools to make sure that it fits into any customer's environment. What do we mean by that is, since we're not a full function SIM replacement, we're not meant to pull that out. We want to be able to provide the data that we're refining. Our data science team is, bring these anomalies to light and bring that wherever you need it. So we've built out an API and also a log sync to get these security events and ingest them into the tool of your choice. So that can be something like Splunk, or a large SIM that you're running, any sort of traditional tool that you're using to sort of collaborate and bring all of the logs or centralize all of your security data. We make it really easy to say, hey, you don't have to use our UI if you don't want to. Bring it over to this other spot. So I've sort of been, telling you about this tool, but I'd like to, end out the presentation. It's really new. It came out, at the late November of last year, so we've only GA'd it very recently. But, we've had really positive feedback already from folks in the EDU space, folks in the healthcare space, folks in finance space. Obviously for this audience, the Texas University makes sense to highlight, but basically folks saying, as soon as I turned this on, it was showing me things that I was glad to know about, and already had me remediating situations where a set of credentials was doing things that were either risky or things that I didn't want to allow. So it gives that visibility in two ways, actually, and it's important to remember that, which is, one, it could be like a malicious set of activity where it's actually, an attacker, and that you're remediating that quickly and getting those credentials, cleaned up and not in the wrong hands anymore. But it could also just be, hey, Jay Smith is accessing an application or accessing from a device that I don't want to allow generally, and I just want to update my policy to reflect that, and Trust Monitor can just highlight those cases to you. So last, before we move into questions, I just wanted to talk about the future of this sort of feature. So we have this data science team, finding out where the outliers are, but behind that, what we're really doing is able to say, we really trust this login because it's normal, and we've seen 1,000 like it, or we think this one's abnormal. And what we can do by that is provide a more adaptive and clean experience for end users, reducing the amount of times that maybe they see MFA or increasing security in other cases. So if this little timeline is, the course of somebody's day, as somebody's credentials are used, maybe they have to do an MFA at the beginning of the day. But if none of the variables change, if they're in the same office, they're using the same device, we continue trust along that timeline. But they go to get a coffee in the midday and they're working at a coffee shop, and they change devices too. Maybe we require them to do a more stringent form of authentication. We won't necessarily block them, or we won't block them, but we require them to do, the security key in this case, or some other login where we're upping the level of trust again. So this is where we're headed to. Is the future is really providing a seamless either increase in friction if we see risk, or decrease in allowing for a more seamless experience if we really trust a particular login. And with that, I will finish out and open it up to questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, great presentation, Ted. We do have a lot of questions here rolling in from the audience. While we do that, I'm just going to bring up this poll question for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about the Duo security solution? And we'll leave that up while we take some questions. So, wow, where to start? So many good questions. First one I'll ask you is about notifications. They said, you mentioned getting an email. Can we get a text message or SMS message of some kind? This question is from Joseph.
So yeah, that's a great question. At this point, we don't do text messages or notifications like that. We are still building out our notification functionality. As I mentioned, this feature came out in late November of last year. So yeah, we have some basic functionality that you can see in your inbox, but we're still building out a new thing. So I'll make a mental note here, and we have a whole feature request area where we're trying to figure out the best way to notify people, and I'll put another little tally next to a text message. So thanks for asking about that.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's see. Next question. Can Duo help us prevent phishing attacks in some ways? From Charlie.
Yeah, Charlie, that's a great question too. So in two ways. I focus this presentation on our analytics feature, but one of our flagship features is MFA, which is just providing that second factor of authentication, making sure any login point for any application, if somebody uses their credentials, then they're getting a push notification that they then respond to, or they're getting a phone call back. And that's a great first step against any sort of phishing. So I would say 100% we can help you address most phishing with that, because if somebody has phished those credentials and they're trying to use them maliciously, they probably won't have your iPhone 2 or your whatever phone you're using. And so providing that second factor of authentication deals with almost all of the phishing risk. But then this tool that I talked about today, looking at access analytics, that also helps with phishing, because if somebody has phished a set of credentials, and it's even more proactive, if they phished a set of credentials and they try to use them, they're probably not doing it in the same office from the same device, and from Jay Smith's credentials typically do. And so this feature would highlight, hey, these credentials look like they're in the wrong hands. They may have been phished, because why are they trying to access from Croatia and from a Mac device when Jay Smith almost always accesses from Austin, Texas, and he does it from a Chromebook or whatever. So yeah, there's definitely sort of twofold support for phishing from Duo.
Excellent. Let's see, another question. There's so many questions here for you, Ted. Chris is asking, with distance learning, we've got a lot of folks working remotely, and more people are using their own personal devices, BYOD. Can Duo handle the enrollment with BYOD devices?
Yes, that's a great. So Duo is actually pretty famous for that. move to remote work is complicated on a variety of levels, but since Duo, it's a self-enrollment process. If somebody wants to use a BYOD device, or it's easier for them when they're in their home office, it's easy for them to set up multi-factor on with that device, and then you can start seeing those authentications and making sure that they're secure as well. And then Duo can even do security checks on their BYOD device if they're comfortable with it, where it's like, hey, do they have a screen lock enabled on this phone that they're now trying to access the Zoom meeting from? Or do they have, is the firewall enabled on their Mac device, or things like that? So yes, we can definitely, that's a great point about remote learning. And yet, it's really easy to enroll in Duo, even with a BYOD device, and then it's really easy for Duo to get this sort of information to do access analytics on from those devices as well.
Excellent. Excellent. And then last question before we go, because we're running out of time in our Q&A session here. What's the best way to get started with Duo?
That's a great question. So one, reach out, talk to us, read a little bit about what we're doing, but the best way to get started, or if you don't use, that's a complicated question because everyone's environment is different, but I will say that most people start with Duo by protecting some of their highest profile applications with multi-factor. And so when people come to us, they say, all right, I want to protect the VPN, I want to protect this set of collaboration applications, or an HR application where private data is, and make sure I'm getting multi-factor on those applications where sensitive data lives, where it would be most, sort of traumatic to the environment if somebody breached those. And then from there, they can expand out to, hey, we'd also like to put a multi-factor on this other application. So I would say starting by putting that multi-factor on there, and then once you're comfortable with that, expanding to say, I want to start looking at devices in Duo, or I want to start using this feature, this more advanced feature where I'm looking at sort of the analytics and the risky logins as well as a part of what I'm doing with Duo. I would say those are later down the line, but people typically start with saying, hey, I want to protect these 3-4 applications, make sure that they're protected with multi-factor authentication.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for our live Q&A, but Ted, there's at least, I see 28 questions out here for you, so maybe you can stay around for a few minutes and answer those electronically. We do appreciate it. Thanks for being on, Ted.
Yeah, thanks so much.
And for more information on Duo, check out the handout that's available there as well in your audience console. Don't forget to fill out the poll question that's on the screen, and of course, visit Duo's website to try out the solution for yourself and get more info. And with that, I'm going to announce our first prize winner. We have an Amazon $500 gift card going to Corey Sellers from Michigan. Congratulations, Corey Sellers from Michigan. 2 more gift cards still to give out after our next presentation, so stay tuned. And speaking of that next presentation, I'm excited now to introduce you to our next presenter. Welcome, Mr. Skip Farmer, Director of Sales Engineering for U.S. Public Sector at Rubrik. Skip, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Good day.
Good day. Thanks for being on. Take it away.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Good day. Today, we're going to talk about modernizing your IT infrastructure. What I'd like to do is talk about this from a data protection standpoint. And there's a lot going on in your infrastructure today, and there's a lot that I think organizations want to do, especially in education and government. Thinking about these data imperatives, right? So we want to modernize and automate. How can we do this and scale, right? The ability to be able to scale with growth, whatever that might be, and with changes within an organization, right? How does an agency change? Governmental departments, sometimes if there are changes, they're within teams, mergers of teams, organizational changes. How do you manage that and that data set and scale up and protect that data? And how do you do that as you look towards cloud? Right? A lot of organizations are looking to either extend into their cloud journey, and we've been hearing about this a lot, right, in the last couple of years. Talking about the digital transformation and the cloud journey. And it still really is a cloud journey. There's still a lot of agencies and organizations that have put some portions of their data sets in the cloud, and they still need to protect it, and they've still put some portions on-prem, and they still have some departments within a governmental agency that aren't yet moved to the cloud. And this creates some inherent risks. So we've heard some about, the phishing attacks and some of those different risks, but there's also the risk about knowing what data is there and now managing that to this kind of last bullet item here, which is managing your data risk, not just from compromise, but also being able to comply with data regulations. So those combination of changes now are saying, well, how do I do these three things? This is a big portion of what organizations are trying to do to focus on with the data set. Now, part of the challenge has been in some cases that there's a legacy structure in place, and it's not to say that wasn't good at the time and wasn't the right thing to do. It's the challenge that over time now it's created some complexities. So I've seen a lot of organizations where there's a program that starts, and if you design and then implement, and maybe that's something that they're working on for 6 months, a year to get ready for this plan, right? And then by the time they roll it out, and then it's a phased-in approach. So you're already talking about potentially a year, maybe a couple of years, depending on how big your agency is, how big the organization is that you're trying to manage these. And then you have a time where that grows, you're utilizing that infrastructure, and everything's great. But now over time, especially if it was kind of before your organization started looking at SAN implementation and new modernized approaches, now it's a little hard to manage. I use the analogy, I like my Jeep, right? I'm a Jeep fan, really enjoy my Cherokee, but it's an older Jeep Cherokee. My family's been telling me to get rid of it for a long time, because what's happened is it starts costing me a little more money, right? Every time I have to do something to it, it's harder to maintain and manage to it. And it's more complex to do that. And the other problem I have is I'm not taking advantage of any new features and capabilities that have come out since then, and I'm not able to really expand. I know that's a simplified view, but it kind of helps me to look at that perspective. Although I like it, it was great at the time. There's definitely, a change that can be made now. So, okay, all that said, what do we do now, especially around the data protection front, and especially around these data sets and managing this with all these different tiers in mind, right? And what I mean by tiers are, workload tiers, hypervisor tiers, cloud tiers. The first is kind of this framework that's starting in the middle. We need to have a way to modernize and automate that approach. And so some of this is around automating our SLAs and managing our upfront service level agreements. And then a lot of times agencies might say, well, I don't necessarily have an agreement for, XYZ, especially around data protection. A lot of times they weren't as solidified as to what the recovery times were and then how to automate and measure that and then meet some type of rapid recovery. This is going to be a core focus, and we'll talk about this a little more, because this obviously ties a lot into ransomware remediation and other challenges, right? That's just one of them. Now it's saying, well, I have this extended ecosystem. As you modernize, it's just, not modernizing just the data protection. You're hearing about modernizing security, modernizing reporting, a lot of different aspects of it. So how can I do this in a way to automate and tie into the rest of my ecosystem? And that's a framework of around an API first structure to allow you to connect into other parts of your IT organization to really extend the value, right? And you want to do this in a secure way. Now, you have to do this as well by being able to then extend into the cloud, right? If that's what your organization is looking to do. And in some cases, there may be different clouds or different structures. We see organizations that may have a mix, right? They may be running O365 for part of it, but a different cloud structure for something else, right? Or there are changes in how the cloud is being adopted by an organization. And then you want to do this with mitigating the data risks on top of that, the cyber resiliency, the data governance. Now, why do I talk about this as a framework? It's because you have to put this model and a model like this in place to be able to add capabilities, to be able to add components and routinely check on that, right? So it's a closed loop process that allows you to do things where I'm setting up my data protection, I'm automating it, that's great, but I've got to have visibility into it. I have to have visibility into the data sets. I have to have more access than I had before to understanding what's there so I can make sure I'm compliant, I'm protected, but then also as I'm changing as I need to, especially with regards to a security profile. And that's why I see a lot of cloud frameworks or a lot of initiatives out there where they're talking about, framework models for different cloud configurations, and it's that same principle, right? It has to be built on this structure to make sure that you can evolve. And that's I think one of the cores of the modernizing of the IT infrastructure. It's giving a much better ability to evolve and grow as your organizational need changes or new governance or compliance or whatever the requirements are that are coming down the road. So let's talk a little bit about that. What does modernizing and automating really mean? And I'm going to look at this for modernizing and data protection aspects. So some organizations have a lot of different backup components. They have, in some cases, still offsite, still tape, still backup storage. And how can we distill that infrastructure that you might have? Remember, some of it might be legacy, and it doesn't mean that there isn't a way to evolve and move this and gain these efficiencies, so that what you can do is begin to take that more complicated distributed structure, automate a lot of the approaches, automate down, and create a secure by design solution to then modernize that protection. So one of the key things that I find through this is really around the accelerating the recovery. Right? So why are we protecting? Why are we backing up? It's really to recover. And a lot of the conversations always focus on data protection in those terms. It's interesting because I find that in our lexicon we talk about that a lot, and really it should be, the focus should really be more on the recovery. So with that, reduction of the complexity, that also comes up with the ability to improve not only your recovery time, speeds, and what you're doing, but also simplify this for the people that have to do this job. The administrators, the people that need the data back, and in some cases, unfortunately, if there's a problem at the data center, do you have a different set of people that may be doing the recovery? Either somebody doesn't have access, it's now at a recovery location, or people are dealing with, we counter this a lot in areas where they're prone to hurricanes, floods, tornadoes. What we found is teams that are actually doing the recovery, if it's needed, are not the teams that are in that location, because what's happening is they're dealing with their family, the protection, their immediate emergency needs, and someone else outside of that group is dealing with those accelerated recovery needs. And that's really a huge piece now too, because it allows you to, protect from, these natural disasters. It allows you to protect from, and get your data back for whatever's going on. And the data is going to come from a variety of sources, right? And you want to do that quickly and adjust your RPOs and RTOs, as needed for the data sets. Now, ultimately, there's a lot of that, cost savings is always in mind, especially now as there's competing elements for funding, right? We know that that's always a challenge. I think there's also really that time consumption cost for operators that's really a bit harder to measure in metrics. But I see that a lot where the teams, are doing the recovery. And obviously, if something bad happens and you're doing restore, as fast as we can is always the response. When do you need it back? The answer I get a lot of times is yesterday, right? So how do we plan to that and save in a lot of these varieties of focused areas? So it allows us to do, to focus on the reduction, and ultimately you get the cost savings. But remember, that's savings in a couple different areas. It's, savings of time management, and they can go to the other roles. But data protection is generally not, what a team wants to do, go in and focus on a day and say, I want to spend all my day managing these things. They say, this is part of my business. It's a necessary part of our organization. How do I minimize the time that I can spend doing this so I can spend focusing on the other pieces, right? Especially if you're in education, if you're in these different things. There are other things you want to be doing, especially now setting up remote learning, and how do we manage to that and adapt to that? And that's really, I think, a large aspect of this. So I want to talk about how we begin to do that. I mentioned SLA automation. So some of this, what we've seen, is really kind of a paradigm shift. And this paradigm shift is going from a traditional kind of policy-based backup where it created all these jobs, and it was, individual data sources as they were protecting in. So the idea is, if I do this, and it was a traditional schedule, it might have been, and blackout dates, all these things that you had to manage to, how do I take a model today and move to a more automated model? And what that automated model would look like is a way where you can say, the SLA will take care of the data sets regardless of where they are. So it looks like the animation here isn't running, but what you would see in that animation is this idea that it's taking a lot of different data sources, and those could be application. You see Epic, SQL, MySQL, different components here, VMware, hypervisors, and saying, okay, I need to take some type of backup. I know the SLA because I know what I need to manage to my recovery time for these. So wouldn't it be nice if I said, well, this is what I'm managing to. These need to be archived. These need to be, stored locally for some period of time. These just need to go to the cloud and move with some, based on some either time, some type of usage pattern, some different metrics. So if I can put that and automate that process, and have everything that's in that bucket meet that automation, then would it be able to send that data out there, and the operator doesn't have to micromanage and go in and manage that, and it creates a lot less moving parts on the daily operation for an operator to create and to manage to. So when we look at our design to this, one thing that I do recommend is that we design a lot of cases really with our recovery in mind, not just the backup, but what's the expectation of each team for their data sets, right? Is it that I'm going to have just one machine back? Is it 100 machines? I can tell you that when I have worked with organizations in state and local and education that have had some type of ransomware attack, generally we're looking at, when we help recover from organizations, more than 60 machines at a time. I think the average I'm seeing is around 80. So that means they're really having to recover at scale. And then how fast do they have to get that back? What kind of time do you have? So these are all things that I recommend looking at, as you look in to managing not just to your SLA and automating that, but how fast am I need it back, how many machines, and how I'm going to structure my recovery. Now, you want to focus and make sure that as part of this, you have, encryption and some of these components that I think have become definitely more table stakes today, right? Storing something at rest, meeting your audit and compliance requirements for reporting, immutability, which you'll hear of a lot. And that's, I think, is really key. And it's making sure that the data protection sets are immutable. That means they can't be externally manipulated, so that if you need to do your recovery, you're able to get that back, and the data sets aren't attacked in some way as well. What we have seen is that, within, I think, probably at least the last year, maybe even a little longer, some of the new ransomware attacks are targeting backup sets as well. So initially they targeted just data sets, and then they said, well, you know what? If people are just able to recover, then this isn't really going to work. So now they said, well, let me try and target backup sets as well. So they are actively aware that that organizations that prepared with data protection use that as their last line of defense, and they're trying to actively disrupt that for recovery, right? So that's a big piece of this as well. And the last is kind of access, of course, building in multi-tenancy role-based access controls for individuals and being able to report and manage to that. Now, I mentioned early on also the automating and the API aspect of this. I think this is where, again, with modernization, you expect it to integrate into the rest of your infrastructure, right? Now, that could be monitoring and reporting. These are just some examples. You can create your own customized approach, especially if you have a customized tool that's being used in-house. But here, just wanted to give an example of some of the integration that's being done on a regular basis. Some allows for deployment of the protection, right? Service catalogs that can be used, automation of the tools that are used. And I think the monitoring is key. One of the things that I talk about a lot is that you really can't manage what you can't see. And if you don't have visibility into that structure, whether it's through monitoring, through security monitoring, but also getting a point-in-time view of here's my data protection, here's the state of it, the health of it, and here are trends that are coming with those data sets, really helps with how you work your overall protection plan, so you can see and evaluate how well it's doing. So we'd like to extend this to the cloud. So a lot of organizations are, at different states of this. So I'm going to talk about this from a couple perspectives, and you can fit it into where your agencies might be today or your organization and how it might work for you. So part of this is, the cloud archival aspect. I have some data on-prem in some cases. I maybe have a primary copy on-prem. Maybe I don't have a copy there, but I need to move a copy into the cloud somewhere. So how can I do that? I want to be able to do that securely, create a single policy around that, around my automation of the SLAs, and potentially tier it to take advantage of additional cost-saving methodologies that cloud service providers have, so that you can do those different tiers and realize that, say, hey, this data set, these logs, we have to keep for X amount of time because it's a requirement. Maybe you have some type of HIPAA regulation in your organization. Maybe you have, some other compliance requirement that you're trying to meet for storage time. And you say some of this data we have to keep, especially with logs. I see this a lot. We got to keep it a long time, but only if there's an incident do we actually do anything. And so in that case, it's very rarely retrieved, but they need to have it. So that might be something you want to tier off then to a lower cost portion within the cloud. Then, of course, there's a cloud migration, and I think there are two aspects of this. How do I kind of do this lift and shift approach, tape some of these on-prem hypervisor components, these guests, and recover them, and so that they're operational in the cloud? Or, as I almost started to say, how do I recover those in the cloud, meaning that may be my DR location, right? Something happens on-prem, I need to recover it. Can I restore that in the cloud? The last piece is around cloud-native protection. So this would be plugins for components within the cloud, such as databases, SQL that are running on cloud-native hypervisor components for you to protect in the cloud. Now, this is a little bit different than like O365 and some of those tools as well, but I'll talk about that in just a minute. So there is protection as well for those with plugins, but this cloud-native protection here could be a combination, right? So it could be, let's say, O365, but it could also be, again, something that's running in a AWS cloud, for example, where you want to organize and orchestrate and manage your snapshots of whatever is running on those AWS EC2 instances that's, as part of your protection process, right? And it's not an all or none, so you don't have to have, just all cloud or just on-prem to be able to manage this. It's designed so that you can grow out with your data protection solution. Again, what a lot of organizations I mentioned at the beginning are looking to do is try to scale, right? And that scale oftentimes means extending into the cloud. So as part of that, you want to, reduce the amount of operational time that it takes, and you want to look at simplifying that policy management and extending that SLA principle from on-prem into your cloud protection. And so that's where you would also be able to improve your recovery times as well. So how do I get something back in just a couple clicks and recover it, whether that's Oracle, whether that's something from O365, whether that's something from Teams or SharePoint or something like that. So there are a lot of variety of the applications. And of course, you want to have visibility into this, especially as your organization might be extending and saying, okay, today we have a lot on-prem, but what if we have, a remote branch, and maybe that's all they're doing at different organizations, just managing the O365, right? There's a public cloud portion, and maybe you have a private cloud or data center component. Again, having the unified visibility, because all of this makes up the data that is important to your agency and your organization. So here as well, we have, and I mentioned before, O365, and this is how we would extend the automation and recovery. So the idea here is, again, taking that simplicity for how you set up that quick start, easy to configure, and then get to that flexible recovery and have complete control of that. And right, and flexible recovery means, well, do I need to get one message back? Do I need, what subset of this data set do I need to get back? Or also remind, I haven't talked about this yet either. In a lot of these cases, we also want to be able to determine what data we may not want to recover, right? And that's something that has some type of compromised file, some type of information that shouldn't have been there that you don't want to have back. And by that, I mean, in some cases, organizations have requirements to expunge or remove data based on some type of time period, and the data can't exist after that time period. So the same way, you don't want to be accidentally putting that data back. So talking now about, this slides advance there correctly. Talking about now extending it to the last portion in this paradigm, which is the mitigating that data risk, right? So we've talked about the automation portion of it, the extending to the cloud, and now we say, well, how do we mitigate the data risk, right? Now, within ransomware, we talked about historically backup was that last line of defense, and as I mentioned, in a lot of cases, ransomware attacks are targeting those backup sets. So if it's not properly constructed and managed, it actually may not be there for the recovery, and obviously that's going to be terrible. So how do we mitigate that? In a lot of cases, how do we determine, right, what the impact of that attack was, and we're calling the kind of the blast radius here to see, what was impacted, and we certainly don't want to recreate the issue, right? So if you're recovering something, you don't want to put that malicious data back, or you want to know what was removed. So you can, in some cases, these are targeting data sets simply to delete them as well. And they're trying different kind of, approaches, right? So what if some data is deleted and you just want to get that back? How do you know what that data is? And of course, you need to be able to do that quickly with larger data sets, because the impact is getting larger. So from there, you want to ensure that the backups themselves can't be compromised. That's that immutability aspect. You want to be able to detect anomalies, right, and assess the impact. So some of these anomalies will be, how is the data changing over time? Are there backup sets that are running longer? Are you seeing backup that's analyzing that data where the backup data is actually, it used to be, let's say, 10 terabytes, and all of a sudden it's either a lot more or a lot less. What kind of trends can you look for? And then once that trend is discovered, how can you go in and look a little more at that data to see how you can assess what kind of recovery is needed, and then, of course, manage that quickly. Now, on top of all this, a lot of organizations, don't know necessarily what's in all the data sets, but are really it's really complicated by having to meet certain types of requirements. Now, I know GDPR doesn't apply to, to all organizations here, but what we're starting to see is also a lot of state compliance requirements. So CCPA is one, California. Other states are beginning to implement some of their own. So how is this going to change the landscape to managing that governance, as you go forward? Again, when you modernize, being able to manage to those. And so we know some of the broad requirements, but how might that change with some of the state-by-state requirements? And I think that's, unknown at this time, right? That's something that's evolving and adapting. So if we have a dashboard where we could look at and assist with our regulatory compliance, where we can meet, and exceed our SLAs with that, and understand, if any point in time an auditor comes in and says, either it could be simple, where's this data set? Where does any of this data live, right? So previously with some of the legacy environments, if it was on a tape, if it was in multiple stored locations, but the visibility to that wasn't clear, that in itself could be a violation. And then you have some kind of out of compliance fine or potentially issue where even if you need to get the data back or do something with it, it's not clear how easy that would be to get back and where that data would live. So those are certainly challenges, and there's no way to then classify that data for the organizational value and automate that process so you can say this data is important, this data is critical, and this other data is not critical. But that's just as important too. I've seen organizations that on site, they have a data lake, they have a lot of data. When they're doing their analysis then and saying, well, look, I'm just going to move everything to the cloud and it all goes there. At some point you're saying, well, does that data actually have to be there? Because now I have to do all those things that I had to do previously, secure it, protect it, make sure I can recover it, and make sure that it doesn't have the same risk of exposure there. So I think, that governance aspect is very important. Now, these things don't have to be done all at the same time, right? So it's not like you have to implement everything at once. Obviously, we recognize there's a phased-in approach, and organizations are going to be at different places with how they're looking at governance, with how they're looking at automation and integrating to other tools within their data center for API integration, and how they're managing to their SLAs. So this allows for a phased-in approach that gives you view into what you're doing, so it's measurable, and you can do a gap analysis to kind of figure out then what needs to change and get a good metric of how everything is going. So, the dashboard view would show, what your exposure here is to some of the information, risks. And so if you can see in the little icon there, the little picture, it has, HIPAA, GDPR. There you have the ability to create custom ones. This is really designed first with what are some of the core big ones, CCPA, GDPR, these others that I've been mentioning that have pre-designed policy components, so you don't have to go in and actually create that framework in there yourself. That's already done. And then as newer ones are added, I expect that those would be, as they get enforced more broadly, those would be part of that governance assessment as well. So when you take all this, I kind of wanted to summarize and bring that back. When you take a lot of this and then say, okay, what are my goals through this this data modernization component? Obviously, modernizing, automating allows you to adapt and change faster, right? That's within an organization, whatever's thrown at you, right? You can adapt and change to that. For the hybrid cloud, how do you begin your migration? You can prepare to scale it up, and you'll be ready when that comes into place. And if you're further along, you can already manage to that, knowing that you'll meet those metrics that you need to for wherever you might be in your use of cloud today. And then the last one is very important, I think, is the inspect and protect, right? We can't manage in some cases to what we can't see, and we need to have visibility in that. So we need to make sure we're protecting our data sets, we have visibility in our data sets, and and we have the ability to adapt over time and monitor that, because we also want to manage by exception, right? We don't want to have to be doing day-to-day saying, is this okay, is this okay? We want to say, hey, everything looks great except for whatever anomaly might be showing up, and then you manage and inspect that anomaly, and that allows for much faster analysis of your environment. So with that, I want to say, thank you for your time today. I hope that I've answered some of the questions that have come in through the slides today, but wanted to see then if there are additional questions out there at this time.
Absolutely, yeah. Great presentation, Skip. We do have some questions for you. While we do that, I'm just going to bring up our poll for everyone out there in the audience that says, what additional information would you like about the Rubrik solution? And we'll leave that up while we take some questions. So let's see, first question that came in I wanted to ask you, Skip, is how do I begin to make the move towards an SLA-based protection model? Any tips on that?
Yeah, I think to remember that this may be for a lot of agencies kind of a paradigm shift. And I think as you start to take a look at what you're doing today with a kind of job-based policy approach, don't get stuck in trying to map that one for one, because it doesn't really map the same way. You're going to get a lot more efficiency. Think about what you want to manage to your SLA, what you want your time approach to be, and how you would change it. And I think you'll find it much easier because you can actually take a lot of that job-based approach and consolidate it down. So I think if the mindset is not looking at that as a one-to-one, but saying what I want my goal to be, if I could kind of change this today and make it more efficient, and thinking that from that perspective, you'll find it very easy to begin putting that SLA approach in place. And I think you'll wonder why that wasn't done a long time earlier for your data protection solutions.
Okay, excellent. Jose here is asking, does Rubrik provide its own cloud space for recovery, or do you partner with the public cloud providers?
We partner with the public cloud providers for recovery. Now, there's some variations depending on what is being protected, right? If it's cloud native components, snapshot components, things like that, those we use infrastructure in place that are part of the CSP, the cloud service providers infrastructure, and that's done on the back end and not really seen. So it takes advantage of the optimization that we can use between the CSPs for that recovery. But it does allow you to move the data to other places. So there are, depending on, again, on what the data sets are, you could move it and recover it to a different cloud. You can recover it to an on-prem location. So there are different ways, that you can even replicate and have the data in another region, another location to do your recovery based on what your recovery needs are.
Got it. Okay. And then, so for public sector institutions out there that are interested in Rubrik and learning more, I mean, what's the easiest way to get started? What do you recommend?
So we provided today, there are a couple, there's a handout, kind of a data sheet, and there's a link to kind of a little bit of a background of the, depending on what your approach might be, ransomware remediation, how to look at that. We do have a strong public sector focused team. That's all that our teams do is focus in that area. So state and local, education, all the way through federal, DOD, and have those DOD compliance. So you could, reach out to those teams as well to be able to support that. And we have as well some public sector specific information through our websites that are focused on SLED or on federal, depending on your agency focus area. And those will have some very good starting tips as well. And certainly, we want to be able to answer questions for you as they come up. It could be as easy as, hey, do you support XYZ? Or, hey, can you come in and help with some kind of an analysis and look at, how we can and modernize and start looking at adapting our data protection approach.
Got it. Excellent. All right. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have in our live Q&A here, Skip, but there are some more technical questions for you. We'll be forwarding those over to you. Of course, we appreciate your help on those, and a great presentation. Thank you so much for being on the event.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, Skip, and thank you to Rubrik for supporting the event. Like Skip said, check out the handout that's there in your audience console in the Handouts tab. It talks about the Rubrik Public Sector Solutions. Data as a Strategic Asset is the name of the resource. And of course, visit Rubrik.com for more information. And I'll just leave up the poll question for anyone who hasn't gotten a chance yet to respond to that while I announce our final gift card winners. We have 2 Amazon $500 gift cards. These are going out to Ashish Mensa from North Carolina and Samuel Hobble from California. Congratulations. Our first winner, Corey Sellers from Michigan, Ashish Mensa from North Carolina, and Samuel Hobble from California. And with that, it's time to wrap up here. Before you go, don't forget to check out the 10 on Tech podcast over in the iTunes store. If you are a potential sponsor of an upcoming EcoCast or MegaCast, reach out to us at connect@actualtechmedia.com. And finally, I hope to see you tomorrow on our Enhancing Data Protection, DRAS, and Disaster Recovery Capabilities MegaCast event. We'll be giving out 5 DJI Mavic Air 2 drones. Oh man, I wish I had one of those. Hope to see you on that event. If you want to learn more about data protection and DR, it's going to be a great event. And with that, we'll wrap up after this event. You'll be automatically redirected to our events website where you can register for any of our upcoming events. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.